They laughed at the poor black girls during class, but no one expected what happened next. At first, no one saw her coming, not the teachers, not the students, least of all the rich girls who giggled behind polished smiles. But it didn't matter, because the moment Glenda was finally seen, it became impossible to look away. Glenda's footsteps echoed across the cold marble of the main hallway, accompanied only by the muffled sound of her old rolling backpack dragging across the smooth floor. Her uniform, a navy blue skirt and white shirt, seemed to fit her differently. Everything around her felt tailored for other bodies, other lives. The collar of her blouse was slightly loose, the fabric worn with age. Her sneakers, clean but battered, made no effort to blend in among the brand-new gleaming shoes around her. She stopped in front of the large glass-covered mural, displaying portraits of award-winning students. White faces, polished smiles, prestigious names. For a second, Glenda's gaze locked onto the last portrait, Academic Excellence Madison Cooper. Her last name gleamed in golden letters, and the girl's flawless smile radiated the confidence of someone who had never had to question herself. "You look lost," came a sharp voice from behind. Glenda turned slowly and saw a blonde girl, her hair tied into a long, perfectly braided plait, standing with a rehearsed posture of superiority. Beige jacket with the school's embroidered logo, Louis Vuitton backpack, and a look that felt more like a verdict. "Or you're just trying to pretend you belong here," the girl added, arching one eyebrow with cruel precision. "I'm just heading to class," Glenda replied quietly, trying to hide her discomfort. "Of course you are," the blonde said with a crooked smile. "Good luck with that." Madison Cooper was exactly like her photo on the mural, perfect, confident, sharp. The eldest daughter of Richard Cooper, owner of one of the most powerful law firms in New York, she grew up with yacht parties and summers in the Hamptons. She was used to being the center, the star, the standard, and every move she made was shadowed by three inseparable figures: Chloe, Emma, and Brianna, all slightly softer versions of herself, but just as rich, blonde, and well-dressed. As the four walked off, muffled giggles trailing behind them, Glenda took a deep breath, smoothed out her uniform with her hands, and kept walking, eyes fixed on the ground. Her heart was beating a little faster, but she was used to that. Since she was little, she'd learned not to react. "Survive in silence," her mother used to say. That morning, Monique had woken up at 4:30. Even after a restless night, she rose with a tired body and went to prepare breakfast. She made buttered toast and poured her daughter's favorite chocolate milk into the blue mug they had used since Glenda was little. When the girl entered the kitchen, already dressed for school, Monique smiled with quiet pride. "Ready, my champion?" Glenda just nodded. She had always been quiet, but Monique read her daughter's eyes like a very old book. She knew what that expression held: anxiety, fear, but also determination. "It's all going to be okay, baby. You're going to show them who you are. You just need to do what you've always done: learn." Now, in the wide hallway of St. Clair's High School, Glenda tried to repeat her mother's words in her mind as she searched for room 205. When she finally found it, class had already begun. The teacher, a middle-aged white woman named Mrs. Keller, stopped writing on the board and looked over her glasses. "You must be the new scholarship student. Glenda, right?" The word scholarship came out with an uncomfortable ease, as if it were a warning to the rest of the class. A few students exchanged glances. A boy in the back let out a muffled laugh. Glenda nodded and made her way to the empty desk at the front of the room, feeling every gaze stuck to her back. At lunch, things didn't get any better. The cafeteria was big, modern, with glass walls and round tables with padded chairs. Everything sparkled. Glenda picked up her tray and walked hesitantly between the already formed groups. Everyone seemed to know exactly where to sit. She spotted an empty table in the corner and walked toward it. "This table is reserved," said Chloe, appearing out of nowhere with a cup of juice in hand. "Reserved?" Glenda asked, surprised. "Yeah, like for people with a VIP pass, you know," Emma added with a fake smile, pointing to her designer blouse. "But you can sit over there," said Brianna, motioning toward a table next to the trash can. Glenda looked at the four of them for a second. Then she just nodded and walked to the table they had pointed to. She sat down slowly and began eating in silence, pretending not to hear the giggles coming from across the cafeteria. Her tray trembled a bit in her hands, but she kept her gaze down. She was used to this, always had been. At the end of the day, as she organized her books in the borrowed locker, she heard Madison's voice again. "I wonder how long you'll last here. Scholarships usually don't make it past the first semester." Glenda didn't respond. She closed her notebook, locked the locker and walked away, ignoring Madison's presence. Deep down she felt angry, but she'd learned that sometimes silence was more powerful than any comeback. That night, sitting at the dinner table with her mother, Glenda shared little about what she'd gone through that day. Monique pressed gently. "Did anyone do something to you, Glenda?" "No." "Nothing major," she replied, pushing rice around her plate with a fork. "Look at me." Glenda raised her eyes slowly. "They don't know what you're capable of, but they will. You don't have to hide. That place isn't bigger than you, Glenda. You are bigger than it." The girl didn't respond. But inside, a spark was starting to flicker. She didn't know how just yet, but she was going to find a way to show them. Not for Madison, not for the teachers, but for herself. "Did you copy from someone? Because there's no way you got that grade on your own." The comment came out flat with a wicked smile curling at the corner of Madison Cooper's mouth. She held the algebra test in one hand, slowly spinning the paper like it was a forged document. Glenda didn't respond. She was seated at the desk next to hers, calmly gathering her materials without looking at anyone. "Miss," Madison called out loudly, with the fake sweetness of someone about to stick a pin in a balloon. "Glenda got a 100. Can you believe that? Maybe it's worth checking if she really understood the material." The whole class turned their heads at once, curious, hungry for the show. Some smiled, others frowned, and the more indifferent ones just watched with the tiredness of someone who had seen this happen before. Mrs. Keller, a slim woman with a controlled voice and pragmatic manner, looked up from her computer and peered at Glenda over her glasses. Glenda answered everything correctly, with detailed explanations. "There's no sign of copying. If you'd like, Madison, I can review your test." Madison clenched her teeth into a mechanical smile and handed over the paper, walking away with stiff steps. The muffled giggles from her friends, Chloe, Emma, and Brianna, didn't ease the sting of being shut down in front of the entire class. At the end of class, as Glenda walked through the hallways toward the library, a notice posted on the bulletin board caught her eye. "Internal tryout. Math debate team registration open until Friday." She stopped for a few seconds, her eyes fixed on the words. She read it again. Math debate, representing the school, audience, elimination test. The thought of getting on stage in front of the whole school made her swallow hard, but something inside her was beating differently now, a kind of voice that had been growing since the first day. It wasn't anger. It was something stronger, a quiet desire to stand up and show what she carried within. On Friday, Glenda filled out the registration form and slipped it quietly into the acrylic box on the coordinator's desk. Madison found out about the registration through Brianna, who had friends in the student council and always brought in the freshest gossip. "The scholarship girl signed up for the team," she said, laughing. "Math debate." "That's a joke, right?" Madison replied with a dry laugh. They were sitting on the bleachers in the gym, waiting for PE class to start. Madison adjusted her sunglasses and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Do you really think they'll let her in?" Emma chimed in, crossing her arms. "She doesn't even have the presence for it." "She'll figure out her place real fast," Madison replied without taking her eyes off the ceiling. The following week, the first debate group meetings began. Glenda arrived right on time, carrying her small notebook, black pen, and focused eyes. She sat in one of the side chairs in room 104, where the group met. The room was well lit, with whiteboards, colorful markers, and a digital screen at the back. Almost everything looked new, except for how her presence was received. "You actually showed up?" Madison said as soon as she walked in. She wore a Columbia University hoodie, flawless hair, and a bored expression. "So competitive of you." Glenda didn't respond. She stayed silent as the other members arrived. 3 boys and 2 girls, all already familiar with one another. The group coordinator, Mr. Lewis, a tall man in his 40s with dark hair and analytical eyes, explained the rules of the internal tryout. We'll do several rounds of paired problem solving, but first we'll observe how you all think as a group. During the discussions, Madison made a point of interrupting Glenda constantly. If she started to present a hypothesis, Madison would speak louder. If she wrote something on the board, Madison would erase it. It was all subtle, carefully cruel. "Are you sure that makes sense?" she'd ask sweetly, though her eyes cut like blades. "Maybe that's not the kind of thing you learned. I don't know, wherever it is you went to school." Even so, Glenda didn't fight back. She just observed, took notes, listened. When she had a chance to speak, she did so quietly, with solid arguments, never fighting for space. The hostility was obvious, but she pretended not to notice. Silence was her armor. The group seemed to naturally follow Madison's lead, not out of genuine admiration, but because she had always been at the center. Her voice dominated. Her presence was impossible to ignore. But even from that position, she could feel that something about Glenda's presence unsettled her. That calm, that lack of reaction. It was like yelling at a wall that didn't echo back. "You'll never stand out if you keep hiding," Madison said at the end of one meeting. "Or maybe that's what you want. To go unnoticed. It's less work, right?" Glenda simply packed her notebooks, placed them in her backpack, and walked out of the room. News about the final tryout started spreading through the school like wildfire. Open presentation in the auditorium. Live problem solving. All students invited. Saturday, 10 a.m. It was the first time St. Clair's had organized a public test like this. The goal was simple. 2 finalists would compete against each other, solving a series of complex math problems on stage. The best performance would earn the title of official school representative for the state math competition. Madison was the first to be called to the stage that morning. The auditorium was packed. Over 100 students, teachers, even some parents. Glenda watched from the side of the stage, sitting silently, eyes fixed on the whiteboard where the challenges would appear. In the back row, Monique had managed to slip in, still wearing her janitor's uniform, clutching her purse tightly on her lap. Madison stepped confidently onto the stage, her hair pulled into a high ponytail and a fitted blazer on. She greeted the coordinator with a self-assured smile and looked out at the audience like someone who owned the place. The timer started. The first problem was simple. Madison answered quickly with ease. The second required more logic. She hesitated. On the third, she missed a basic derivative formula. Time kept ticking, and her face began to tense. She forced a smile but stumbled again. When the final alarm went off, she had only one correct answer. A soft murmur spread among the students. Madison stepped off the stage without looking at anyone. Next, Glenda Williams. She walked slowly, eyes on the floor. When she reached the stage, she avoided looking at the audience. She just took a deep breath and grabbed the marker. The first problem appeared on the screen. Glenda read it once and began writing immediately. Her hand moved with confidence. Line after line. Done in 2 minutes. The second problem, even more complex, required abstract thinking. She paused for 3 seconds, stared at the board, then calmly turned, erased part of her solution, and started over. It was an unconventional method, but clean. When she finished, the room was silent. For the third challenge, a quadratic equation with constraints, she used an algebraic shortcut that was both unusual and elegant. When the timer hit 0, Glenda had 4 correct answers, and in the last second she turned and wrote the solution to the 5th, just as time ran out. There was a pause, a suspended silence. The coordinator looked at the judges, who whispered to each other. Then, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, his voice rang out through the microphone. The representative of St. Clair's High School for the state math competition will be Glenda Williams. The auditorium erupted in applause. Teachers, surprised, stood clapping. Some students cheered. Others just stared, stunned. In the back, Monique cried silently, her hand over her mouth, her eyes shining with pride. Madison, off to the side of the stage, remained seated, unmoving. The world around her carried on, but she had stopped. For the first time, she wasn't the center, and she didn't know what to do with that. Was it her, The scholarship girl? The question came in a barely disguised whisper from a blonde student in a lavender sweater as she walked past Glenda on Monday morning. She didn't look directly at her, but she didn't have to. Glenda knew they were talking about her. The hallway felt more crowded than usual, as if everyone had decided to show up at the same time just to stare. She felt the stares stick to her like invisible labels. Some were curious, others judgmental. But the hardest part was the silence between a stifled laugh and a whisper from the corner of someone's mouth. It wasn't any different in the classroom. Mrs. Keller walked in a few minutes after the bell, and before even opening her book cleared her throat and said, "Before we begin, I'd like to congratulate Glenda Williams for representing our school at the state math competition. Her performance was brilliant." The word brilliant lingered in the air for a few seconds. Glenda kept her eyes on the desk. She didn't want to lift her chin. She knew that if she did, she'd meet the faces now turning toward her with surprise, shock, or disdain. From the back of the room, Chloe muttered a sarcastic, "Wow!" Emma giggled under her breath. Brianna rolled her eyes. And Madison? Madison said nothing, but her silence was even louder. She sat with a serious expression, perfect posture, her right hand clenched on the desk, as if simply breathing next to Glenda was testing her patience. Between classes, Glenda's sudden fame grew like a silent wave. There was no real celebration, no party. But now teachers greeted her in the hallway. Mr. Burton, the physics teacher, approached her after class and said, "I read the tryout report, that vector approach you used. It's not something we usually see here. Impressive." Glenda just nodded in thanks. She was happy, but cautious. She knew how quickly things could shift in a place like this. The same school that once ignored her now watched her with interest. But interest was never affection. That she had learned early on. Later, as she organized her books in her locker, she heard footsteps approaching with purpose. "Glad you're enjoying this moment," Madison said, leaning against the locker next to hers, arms crossed. "Must be a new feeling for you." Glenda didn't respond. She continued calmly sorting her materials. "But just so we're clear," Madison went on, "being good at math doesn't mean you run things here. Winning a competition doesn't make you part of all this. Don't fool yourself." Glenda closed her locker and looked at her for the first time that day. "I'm not here to run anything, I'm here to learn." Madison pressed her lips together. She seemed to be expecting a different reaction, something more defensive, more irritated. But that calm, steady response was worse. It was like Glenda wasn't fighting the same battle as her, like she was on a completely different playing field. In the teacher's lounge, the buzz was growing too. Mr. Lewis, the debate team coordinator, was speaking with Principal Anderson, a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. "She's got real talent. She's different," he said, resting his elbows on the glass table. "Her problem-solving framework. It's genius-level stuff." "And how are the others reacting?" "Most of them are fine, but Madison, of course," the principal said with a humorless smile. "The Coopers don't like being overshadowed. This will be delicate." Meanwhile, Glenda was getting ready for her first official practice as team representative. She arrived early, as always, and sat at the front table with her notebook open. She liked reviewing concepts before anything else, organizing her thoughts like tidying up a room before a guest arrives. When the others showed up, side conversations began. No one dared question her presence anymore, but there was tension in the air, like they were still waiting for her to slip up. Madison walked in last, face composed, eyes dark, features sharp. She nodded at the group, completely ignoring Glenda. During the exercises, Madison seemed focused on finding flaws. When Glenda suggested a faster solution for one of the equations, Madison cut in. "Sure, but that's just one way. There are more refined methods, right?" She looked at the teacher, seeking validation. But Mr. Lewis, raising an eyebrow slightly, responded, "Glenda's method is efficient and elegant. It cuts 2 steps and maintains the logic. Excellent work." It was the first time Glenda received a compliment in front of Madison, and the first time she noticed something new in her rival's eyes: discomfort. At the end of the session, as everyone was leaving, Mr. Lewis approached her quietly. You're going to go far, Glenda. And it's not just because of math. It's because of how you're handling all of this. She didn't know what to say. She just nodded, storing the compliment like something too rare to leave out in the open. Later, as she walked toward the school gate, Jaden, a tall student with brown skin and a warm smile, caught up to her. "Hey, mind if I walk with you?" She hesitated for a second, then gave a small smile. "Sure." They walked side by side. "You were amazing on stage Saturday," he said. "Seriously, nobody saw that coming, not even the teachers." "Neither did I," she admitted, a bit shyly. "You're kidding. That was a masterclass. I've never seen anyone break down an equation like that." Glenda chuckled softly. "I just did what I always do. Only this time, everyone was watching." Jaden was quiet for a moment, then looked at her more seriously. "Well, you better get used to it, because now they really are watching." The next day, Glenda found a note taped to her locker door, a plain white sheet with typed letters. "Being smart doesn't change where you came from. Don't forget who you are." She read it, took a deep breath and threw it in the trash. She already knew where it came from, and she also knew it wasn't worth keeping. Throughout the week, teachers started including her more in discussions. Even Mrs. Keller, once so neutral, began asking for her input on more complex problems. At lunch, she still sat alone. But now, some students looked at her with respect. 2 sophomores even approached to ask how she had solved one of the problems. She explained patiently, without arrogance. She didn't want to impress anyone. She just wanted to study in peace. In the principal's office, Madison had a private meeting with Principal Anderson. "Glenda will represent the school," the principal said firmly, "and you will be her official assistant. That means working together, Madison, not against." "I understand. Truly understand, because this is no longer about you. It's about the team and the school." Madison left the office with clenched fists. She had never been anyone's assistant, ever. It burned like acid. But Glenda wasn't looking for revenge. She wasn't planning to humiliate anyone. Her response would come in silence, as it always had, in a well-done calculation, in a precise equation, in a result impossible to ignore. And maybe, in that moment, she began to understand. What she carried inside didn't need a stage, or fame, or revenge. It only needed space, because now everyone was finally seeing what had always been there, and they couldn't pretend not to anymore. "That seat's taken." The voice came before Glenda could even pull out her usual chair in room 104. One of the girls on the debate team, Olivia, dark-haired, slim, with a button-up shirt rolled at the elbows, gestured with her chin toward the back of the room. "Professor asked you to sit back there today." "Strategy change," she said flatly, returning to her stack of papers. Glenda hesitated for a moment but didn't argue. She walked to the back of the room and took a seat farther from the board. No one looked directly at her, but she could feel it. The movement, the sideways glances, the brief whispers, like slow-firing darts. It wasn't the shock of something new anymore. It was resistance to something that had already happened. Since becoming the official representative of St. Clair's at the state competition, Glenda had clearly noticed a divide within the team. The ones who barely knew her name before now talked to her like childhood friends, but others, the silent majority, avoided her with polite discomfort. And then there was Madison, who didn't even bother to hide it. At the first official prep meeting for the competition, Mr. Lewis laid out performance goals for the team. He wanted a strict routine of study and simulations, focusing not just on technique, but also on communication and real-time reasoning. Madison sat beside him, tablet in hand, taking notes like she had everything under control. She'd been assigned the role of technical assistant, meaning she would accompany Glenda during all practices, review problems, build solution strategies. But in practice, Madison made a point of always staying one step behind or above. "We should start with combinatorial sequences," Glenda suggested, as they reviewed a set of questions. "We could explore those variations with restrictions. Maybe—" Madison cut in, not looking up. "But the tournament format usually favors relational algebra. I've competed 3 times. I know how it works. But I'm just trying to keep you from making mistakes, Glenda. Try trusting someone who's been through this. Glenda took a deep breath and closed her notebook. Madison's tone was so polished, so composed, that any bystander would assume she was genuinely helping. But Glenda knew. Every correction was an attempt to chip away at her confidence. Every suggestion was a reminder that she didn't belong. After practice, Glenda headed to the library. She needed silence. At the far end of the math section, between tall shelves, she found an empty table. She sat down and pulled out her notebook. She'd barely started sketching a diagram when a deep but gentle voice spoke beside her. "Is that advanced logic?" She looked to the side. Jayden stood there, physics book in hand, dark t-shirt, and that shy smile that always seemed too genuine to be casual. "Yeah. I'm trying to break down a sequence," she replied, a little unsure. "Want help?" She thought for a second and gave a vague shrug. "Only if you can solve this," she said, pointing at the equation. Jayden sat down, examining the page for a few seconds. "You've got a weird brain." "That's a compliment, by the way." Glenda laughed. And it was maybe the first time since she'd stepped into St. Clair's that she laughed genuinely with someone. Over the week, Jayden became a constant presence, always easygoing, never intrusive. Sometimes they exchanged quick words in the hallway. Other times they crossed paths in the library. He seemed to understand her quiet nature, never forcing conversations but always willing to listen. "How do you stand working with Madison?" he asked one afternoon. "It's not a choice," she answered. "It's what I have to do. I couldn't do it. She's always given me the creeps. That toothpaste commercial smile, but inside, I don't know, like a robot programmed to win." Glenda gave a slight smile but said nothing. Meanwhile, Madison continued her silent campaign. In one of the presentation simulations, during a problem projection, she deliberately changed a value on the paper handed to Glenda. "It was a printing error. I only noticed later," she said, feigning surprise when Mr. Lewis asked. Glenda didn't call her out, but she saw the satisfied look in Madison's eyes at the end of the session. During an oral drill where members had to justify their reasoning in front of the group, Glenda began explaining a line of thinking that linked matrix algebra with nonlinear systems. Madison interrupted with a loud cough. "Sorry, it's just, maybe that's a little too complex for this level. Sometimes simple works better, right? Or sometimes the complex is exactly what sets excellent reasoning apart from the average," Mr. Lewis replied, before Glenda could say anything. Madison forced a smile. "Of course, Professor. Just trying to help." But inside, she was boiling. The following week, training intensified, real-time simulations, partner dynamics, review of past exams, and more, Glenda stood out. She wasn't loud, she didn't assert herself, but her solutions were solid, fast, and unpredictable. In one session, she solved a vector geometry problem using a method even the teacher hadn't expected. "How did you think of that?" Mr. Lewis asked, amazed. "I noticed a pattern," she replied quietly. From the corner of the room, Jayden clapped softly. Glenda blushed. Madison, on the other hand, said nothing, but her jaw was tight, her eyes locked on her notebook, like she wanted the words to disappear. In the hallways, rumors were starting to spread. Some students said Madison was losing ground. Others claimed she was letting Glenda shine out of pity. "She's just a scholarship kid. When it's the real competition, she'll choke," Glenda overheard one morning as she passed a group of upperclassmen. She didn't stop, but the words stayed with her. That night at home, Glenda sat at the kitchen table solving problems under a dim light. Monique was washing dishes. "You're awfully quiet today," her mum said. "I'm just tired. Or someone's making you swallow something." Glenda looked at her for a moment, then lowered her eyes. "They don't want me there, and now it's not just because I'm different. It's because I'm good." Monique dried her hands and sat across from her daughter. "So what are you going to do?" "Keep going." Monique nodded, proud. "I raised you for that." The next day, when Glenda arrived at school, she found a printed sheet taped to her locker. A meme, a drawing of a black girl holding a calculator, with bold letters underneath, "Hood nerd trying to be a genius." She tore it off without a change in expression, folded it, threw it in the trash, without a word. In room 104, already mid-training, Madison sat waiting, tablet in hand. Ready for today's challenge? Glenda simply opened her notebook. Always. And in that small gesture, no shouting, no confrontation, she made it clear. Her presence there wasn't a favor. It was earned. And that's what bothered Madison the most, because Glenda didn't need to beat her with words. She won with numbers, with silence, with skill. And the more they tried to dim her light, the brighter she shone. Who do you think you are? The question, low and sharp, was thrown like a blade at Glenda's back just as she stepped out of the debate team's study room. Madison was right behind her, brisk steps, arms crossed, eyes cold. You act all sweet and quiet, but deep down you're loving this, aren't you? Everyone looking at you like you're some kind of miracle. Glenda stopped, but didn't turn around. She kept her eyes fixed on the white marble floor, glowing under the cold hallway lights. I don't need anyone to look at me. Don't need it? Madison stepped closer, now beside her. Then why are you always here, always making yourself seen, with that martyr act that drives everyone crazy? Glenda finally looked at her, for the first time in days. Her face was calm, but her eyes were steady. I'm just doing my work. You're the one trying to erase me. Madison scoffed, lost for words. Her proud posture was beginning to crack, and Glenda noticed. But as always, she turned and walked away without delivering a final blow. Later, back at home, Glenda spread her books across the dining table while Monique prepared dinner. The smell of garlic rice mixed with the soft sound of pages flipping and calculations being scribbled in black ink. Mom, have you ever had to pretend you didn't know something, just to not make someone uncomfortable? Monique paused, leaning against the kitchen doorway, dish towel still in hand. When you clean rich people's bathrooms, baby, you learn to do that every day. Sometimes just to keep your job. Other times, just so people don't get uncomfortable with how hard you work. Glenda lowered her head. I thought that if I was good, really good, it would be enough. And you are. But the world doesn't always like seeing a girl like you shine. Sometimes they'd rather you stay quiet in the corner, not making waves. Monique stepped closer, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. But what you know, no one can take that away. And what they feel, that's not your problem. Trust me. Glenda nodded and closed her notebook. That night, lying in bed, the dark room lit only by the hallway light, her mind drifted to a forgotten memory. The community room in her old school had a low ceiling, a noisy fan, and the smell of chalk. It was a Saturday, and 9-year-old Glenda sat in front of a dirty blackboard where numbers and letters filled an equation the rest of the class couldn't solve. Her teacher, Miss Carmem, a woman with a firm voice and a kind smile, watched her closely. Glenda, are you sure about this last step? She asked, pointing to the final line of the solution. The girl nodded, gripping her pencil tightly. I tested it. 3 times. It works. The teacher smiled, surprised, and that day, for the first time, she wrote Glenda's name on the school's honor board with yellow chalk. But later that same afternoon, in the lunch line, a group of girls approached her. You think you're better than us, huh? Just 'cause you can do math? Your hair's not even brushed. You think that's gonna help you be somebody? Glenda didn't answer. She learned very early that intelligence came with a price, that sometimes knowing more was a hidden burden, and that most of all, the world wasn't always ready to hear a poor black girl say she had the right answer. The next week, she asked her teacher to stop writing her name on the board, said she'd rather stay in the classroom alone doing the tests, that she didn't need recognition. Miss Carmem, eyes filled with sadness, understood, and never insisted again. The next day's training was different. Mr. Lewis had set up a new activity where each student had to present and explain a complex problem in front of the group, a kind of preview of the competition. Madison went first. Her presentation was flawless. Technical language, sophisticated vocabulary, well-organized steps. But at the end, while justifying one of her choices, she made a small unit conversion error. Subtle, but there. Glenda noticed. She thought about correcting it, but hesitated. Mr. Lewis caught it, though, and gently pointed it out. "Great presentation, Madison, but double-check your unit in step 3. That could throw off the final result." Madison just smiled, swallowing her discomfort. Then it was Glenda's turn. She stood slowly, holding her notebook against her chest. She walked to the front of the room, where the whiteboard waited. She wrote the equation at the top and began to speak. Her voice was quiet but steady. The words flowed easily, and her reasoning was clear. But what caught everyone's attention was the solution. Glenda used a hybrid approach, set theory and mathematical induction, to solve a problem that usually took at least 2 pages. She did it in 5 lines. There was silence. Mr. Lewis leaned forward. The other students blinked, trying to process. "How did you come up with that?" one of the boys asked, genuinely curious. "I saw a pattern in the first 2 examples. The rest followed through logical induction. I proved it by contradiction, to be sure." Mr. Lewis stood. "That method isn't common in high school. Where did you learn it?" Glenda shrugged. "On my own. An old book I found at the community library." He nodded, clearly impressed. After class, as she gathered her things, she heard footsteps from the back of the room. "You've always known how to do that?" It was Madison. Her tone wasn't exactly hostile, but it carried something unsettled. "I've been studying since I was little," Glenda replied, "but I never had a place to show it." "Why not?" Glenda paused before answering. "Because no one wanted to see." They stood in silence for a few seconds until Madison turned and left without another word. Later, in the hallway, Chloe and Emma approached Madison. "Did you see the way the teacher looked at her today?" Emma said. "I've never heard him compliment anyone like that." "She's becoming the golden girl," Chloe added, biting her fingernail. "For now," Madison replied, eyes distant. "But this story's not over." That afternoon, Glenda waited for the bus in front of the school. The sky was overcast, a cold wind sweeping leaves across the pavement. Jaden approached, wearing a denim jacket and carrying his physics books under one arm. "You were unbelievable today," he said, smiling. "That solution was college level." Glenda smiled awkwardly. "I just saw a faster way." "And a smarter one. People are finally starting to see it. But you always knew, didn't you?" She thought for a moment. "Knowing isn't the hard part. The hard part is still knowing when everyone around you keeps trying to convince you that you don't." Jaden nodded. "They're going to have to get used to it, because you're not going anywhere." When the bus arrived, Glenda climbed in, sat in the very back, and leaned her head against the window. Her reflection, blurred in the glass, showed a quiet, tired girl, but steady. A girl who, even after learning how to hide, was starting to realize that maybe it was finally time to be seen. "Are you sure that's the result?" The question came out flat, with an almost impersonal tone. Madison was staring at the sheet in Glenda's hand, like she was inspecting a defective product. They were seated side by side in room 104, prepping for the final stretch before the state competition. The paper held an advanced combinatorics problem that Glenda had solved with precision. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "I double-checked it 3 times." "Well, maybe you should do it again." "Sometimes we trust our instincts too much," Madison replied, pushing the sheet back with 2 fingers. Glenda said nothing. She took the paper, folded it calmly, and placed it in her folder. She wasn't surprised anymore. For weeks now, Madison had been testing her limits with carefully disguised jabs, masquerading as advice. It was all rehearsed theater, patience and poise on the surface, but underneath, something ready to snap. Mr. Lewis walked into the room a few minutes later and made an announcement. "Today we're running a full simulation. Timed. The 2 of you will solve the problems separately, then present the logic behind the solution together. You've got 30 minutes. As he handed out the sheets, Glenda felt the tension in the air. She knew each practice now was basically a battleground. The exercise was complex, blending matrix algebra, propositional logic, and hidden variables. The kind of question where a single distracted error could cost you dearly. Glenda focused. She wrote calmly, eyes locked on the page. She was in the 3rd stage when something felt off. One of the base values provided in the question was wrong. She blinked. "Read it again," The base number used in the sequence didn't match the given parameters. She glanced at Madison's sheet. Hers was different. In that moment, it all clicked. The switch wasn't a typo. It was intentional. Someone had swapped the sheet, and only one person had access to the copies on Mr. Lewis's desk before the activity started. Madison. Still, Glenda kept her composure. Instead of confronting it, she rebuilt the logic of the problem, treating the incorrect value as an unknown. She introduced a new variable and resolved everything based on hypothesis. When time was up, Mr. Lewis asked them to start their presentation. "Madison, you can begin with the first part," he said. She stood, wrote on the board, and began her explanation with confidence. But as she progressed, her reasoning started to falter. By the third step, she stumbled. "Sorry," she said, adjusting her glasses. "I think I made a small inversion mistake." Mr. Lewis frowned slightly. "Glenda, would you like to continue?" She stood, walked to the board, and pointed to the altered number. "The original value in the question was incorrect, so I introduced an alternative variable to preserve the logical structure of the sequence. Like this," she explained line by line. The solution was flawless, elegant, precise, and adapted in real time. Mr. Lewis was silent for a few seconds before speaking. "That was exceptional." A few light claps came from the back of the room. Madison stayed silent. As they left the room, Glenda walked past Madison without a word. But as she turned the corner, she heard footsteps quickening behind her. "Are you going to accuse me?" Madison asked, blunt. "Of what?" "You know." Glenda turned and looked at her calmly. "I know what you tried to do, and I know that you know I solved it anyway, so if you want to keep playing dirty, go ahead. Just know I'll keep winning clean." Madison swallowed hard. She wasn't used to losing, especially in silence. The next day, Mr. Burton, the physics teacher, congratulated Glenda in front of the class, using her adapted resolution as an example of out-of-the-box thinking. Some people repeat formulas, others create them. That's rare. Madison, seated in the middle row, was scribbling in her notebook with tense strokes. After class, in the reserved parking lot for upperclassmen, she got into her father's black sedan, armored, with a chauffeur. Richard Cooper, in a charcoal grey suit and a Swiss watch visible under his white shirt cuff, was typing on his phone without even looking up. "How's the prep for the competition?" "Fine." "Are you still the leader?" "Technical lead." "Technical? What do you mean?" "Glenda Williams, the scholarship girl. She did better in the tryout. The school gave her the title." Richard finally looked at her. "Is this serious?" "I let it happen. It was one problem. A slip. I didn't raise you to be anyone's assistant, Madison, especially not someone who doesn't belong in our world." She lowered her eyes, biting her lip. "I'll fix it." That night, alone in her room, Madison cried. But not like someone defeated. She cried with rage, with shame, with the humiliation of someone who had never learned how to handle her own failure. Glenda, on the other hand, was studying with the radio playing softly in the background. A host talked about the weather and chances of rain. She drew graphs in an old notebook, focused. Monique moved about the house, doing laundry, tidying up the little they had. "Sweetheart, eat something." "I will." "You're studying too much." "Just until the competition." Monique sat next to her, resting her chin in her hand. "I know you want to get everything right, but don't forget, you don't have to prove anything to anyone." Glenda smiled without looking up from her work. "I know, Mom, but even so, I want to." In the days that followed, the atmosphere between Glenda and Madison turned cold. No more pretending. Madison showed up, participated, did what was necessary, but made no effort to hide her discomfort. During another simulation, Glenda gave such a strong presentation that she was interrupted by applause before she even finished. Mr. Lewis, impressed, commented, "If the competition were today, we'd already have our trophy." Madison didn't react, but her eyes were far away. At the end of practice, while they were packing up their materials, Mr. Lewis called both of them over. "I want to remind you, you're a team, even with different roles. Glenda is the representative. Madison, you're the technical lead. That means support, organization, reinforcement. Understood?" They both nodded. As they walked out, Madison said without looking at Glenda. You won. Are you happy now? I didn't want to beat you. I just wanted the right to be here. Madison stopped, took a deep breath. You're good, I just didn't know how to deal with that. Glenda was quiet for a moment. We still have a competition ahead of us. Madison nodded, and for the first time, she didn't say anything else. She just walked beside her to the gate. It was the beginning of a different kind of war, the internal one, between what we try to prove and what we have no choice but to accept. Ms. Williams, here's your badge. The competition starts in 15 minutes. Glenda took the badge with both hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, even though her face remained calm. She hung it around her neck and looked around. The lobby of the Manhattan State High School buzzed with voices, hurried footsteps, and people holding spreadsheets, clipboards, and thermoses. The tables were aligned with military precision, each one bearing a flag representing a different school. Madison appeared a few steps behind, walking alongside Mr. Lewis. She wore a dark blue blazer and held a folder with support materials. Her eyes were serene, but Glenda could see the effort behind that calm. Everything okay? Mr. Lewis asked. Glenda nodded. I'm ready. And you, Madison? Everything's in place. They walked together to the main stage, where the order of presentations would be drawn. In the back row of the audience, Monique sat quietly, still wearing her janitor's uniform beneath a knitted coat. She was clearly out of place among the suited-up parents and mothers in heels, but she held her posture firm, her eyes locked on her daughter. The competition announcer stepped onto the stage and picked up the microphone. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 10th Annual New York State Mathematics Competition. Today we have the brightest young minds from across the state, ready to face the most complex challenges of logic, algebra, and mathematical creativity. Remember, here knowing is not enough. You must show how you think. The drawing began. When the name St. Clair's High School came up in third position, Glenda glanced at Madison. The other girl took a deep breath. It'll be quick, and it'll be you. Glenda made her way to the prep area. She received the official notebook, 2 pens, and a digital timer. There were 2 chairs facing a large whiteboard, surrounded by cameras broadcasting live to the auditorium's giant screen. The rival school, Midtown Classical, had just delivered a clean, well-structured solution, but it lacked creativity. The judges jotted down notes, the audience remained calm. It was a perfect moment to make an impact. Mr. Lewis gave her a subtle nod. Glenda stood up, walked to the center of the stage, and positioned herself in front of the panel. Representing St. Clair's High School, student Glenda Williams, the announcer said. The audience applauded politely. A few leaned forward, curious. The challenge will appear on the screen in 5 seconds. Total resolution time 10 minutes. Good luck. The equation appeared, a system of 4 variables with logical constraints, time, and a 3-dimensional vector space. It was, without question, the most difficult so far. Glenda kept her eyes fixed on the projection for several long seconds. Her heart was racing, but her mind worked in silence. She took the first step. Slowly, she outlined the matrix structure, converted it into equations, isolated variables, substituted with an implicit formula, created an auxiliary function. By minute 4, she was halfway through. She wasn't chasing speed, she was chasing clarity. The audience was silent. In minute 6, Glenda paused, breathed. She turned toward Madison, who stood watching from the side of the stage, her eyes locked on her. There was no hostility, just tension. Glenda turned back to the board. She picked up the blue marker and highlighted the dependent terms and domain conditions. In minute 7, she changed the vector base using logical reasoning, a method no previous contestant had even attempted. And then, in minute 8, she wrote the final solution with a double arrow, highlighting the conclusion in larger print. She turned to the audience. The answer is 34. The system only resolves under these specific conditions, and the key lies in the balance of the transversal vectors. The timer read 8:57. For a moment, silence held. Then the judges began murmuring, exchanging papers, nodding in approval. The auditorium erupted in applause, not polite, not formal, genuine. Mr. Lewis gave a quiet smile. Madison lowered her head briefly, then looked back up at her teammate with something new in her expression. Respect. In the audience, Monique brought her hands to her mouth, eyes glistening. A tear rolled down her cheek and she let it fall. At the end of the round, the committee announced the final rankings, St. Clair's in first place. During the medal ceremony, the competition coordinator called Glenda back to the stage. She walked up slowly, receiving the recognition as teachers, classmates, and even competitors gave her a standing ovation. Madison handed her the medal with a reserved smile and whispered as she fastened it around Glenda's neck, "You were better than I thought anyone could be." Glenda just smiled. I was just being myself. Back in the audience, Monique watched them with a heart overflowing. She had never imagined seeing her daughter on that stage, receiving applause no detergent, no mop, no long night shift could buy. As they exited the auditorium, the halls were crowded. Students from other schools congratulated Glenda. Teachers took pictures with her. Mr. Lewis was receiving handshakes and praise from the organizers. Madison, quieter, observed it all. When she finally had a moment alone with Glenda, she extended her hand. Congratulations. No irony this time. Glenda shook her hand firmly. Thank you. Madison hesitated before continuing. You still don't belong to this world. Not the way it's shaped right now. But maybe you'll change it. I'm not here to fit in. I'm here to make room. That night, back home, Glenda placed the medal on the kitchen table. Monique watched her from a distance, holding a cup of tea in both hands. And now? She asked, a smile on her face. Glenda looked at the medal, then at her open notebook, where new challenges were already being sketched. Now I keep going. There's still so much I want to learn. Monique stepped closer, kissed the top of her daughter's head and whispered, You're already my greatest trophy. Outside, night settled over the city, quiet and cold, but inside that modest home, where everything came through hard work, there was light. A quiet light, but powerful. And for the first time in a long time, Glenda knew the world might be big, harsh, and unfair, but not bigger than what she carried inside. It's her, Glenda. She won state. The shout shot through the main hallway of St. Clair's like a spark through dry straw. Students turned their heads, teachers peeked out from behind door frames, and phones were raised in an instant, ready to capture the moment. Glenda, just stepping through the school gates with her backpack over her shoulders and the modest medal hanging around her neck, almost recoiled from the noise. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. Jaden appeared within seconds, his usual bright smile in place, eyes shining. I told you you'd crush it, he said, giving her a light celebratory tap on the shoulder. Glenda answered with a reserved smile, the kind of smile worn by someone still trying to process what they're feeling. Behind her, Mr. Lewis walked calmly, a folder under his arm and the look of a man with a mission accomplished. Next to him, Madison stayed quiet, but without her usual tension. Her eyes were steadier now, almost neutral. Unlike before, when Glenda's presence unsettled her, she seemed to accept it now. Not with affection, but with recognition. Principal Anderson was already waiting for them in the entrance hall. When she saw the group approaching, she gave a formal smile and motioned them inside. This way, please, we have something prepared. The auditorium doors opened. Inside, teachers, students, staff, and even a few parents were gathered. On the stage was a small table with a school banner and a live microphone. A sign read, St. Clair's Pride, Talent that Inspires. Glenda froze for a moment. No one told me there'd be this, she murmured. Mr. Lewis leaned slightly toward her. It's just a tribute. You earned it. As she walked toward the stage, her eyes searched the auditorium, and there was Monique, sitting quietly in the third row, in her simple work clothes, her hair pulled back into a quick bun. She wasn't the kind of guest the school was used to receiving, but she was there, with the most proud, steady gaze in the entire room. The principal took the microphone and began her speech, praising Glenda's performance in the competition, her technical preparation, her calm under pressure, her intelligence beyond her years. She spoke of the importance of representing the school with excellence and of proving that talent and merit have no single look, no single background. Today we celebrate a student who not only took first place at the state level, but who taught us a new way to see human potential, the principal said. Please welcome Glenda Williams to the stage. Applause echoed through the auditorium. Glenda walked slowly, her heart pounding harder than ever. She took the microphone with both hands, gripping it gently. She began, voice trembling. She paused, took a deep breath. I just wanted to study, to learn, to grow, and to be respected for that. I never thought all of this would happen, but now that it has, I hope it's not just for me. I hope the girls who come after me, girls from where I come from, with skin like mine, with lives like mine, get this chance too. More applause. This time, some were standing. As she stepped off the stage, Madison approached, holding a folder with the competition reports. Forget what I said on the first day, she said, with a tone that wasn't trying to sound noble. You belong here. I just had to understand that. Glenda nodded. She didn't smile or hug her, but her eyes made it clear, message received. Hours later, in the hallways, students who once passed her without a glance now stopped to offer congratulations. A freshman girl, black with long braids, walked up to her shyly. Hi, I just wanted to say you inspired me. I used to think this place wasn't for me either, but now, maybe it is. Glenda smiled and gently touched the girl's shoulder. It is. Just don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The next day, a new plaque was hung in the school's Hall of Honor. It was a photo of Glenda, medal around her neck, with her name engraved in silver letters, Glenda Williams, 2025 State Mathematics Representative. In the library, Glenda still sat at the same table, the same notebooks, the same routine. No arrogance, no vanity, just study, just focus. Jaden passed by late in the afternoon, leaning casually against the nearby shelf. Not taking even one day off. Still got a lot to learn, she replied, eyes never leaving her notebook. But now at least, there's a little more room for that, right? Glenda finally closed the notebook. She looked out the window, where the sun was slowly sinking behind the city's tall buildings. The last rays hit the glass, painting everything in a golden light. Maybe. But the best part is, now I know I can build that space, whether someone gives it to me or not. She left the library with steady steps, crossed the quiet courtyard, past the central fountain and walked to the garden behind the school. There she sat on a stone bench, the medal still tucked inside her jacket pocket. She didn't need to display it anymore. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the wind in the trees and the faint sound of voices from the building. For the first time since it all began, there was no fear, no doubt. There was peace, and more importantly, there was certainty.